So, hello everybody, can you hear me? Depend. So, welcome to this webinar on the project Breaching the Walls. And when the project application was submitted, everyone believed we would organize the webinar or workshop in Prague, on site in Prague. Finally, the worldwide pandemic situation presses us to the online form of meeting. Nevertheless, I think this will be an inspiring and useful event, and I will present you some photos in this introduction to see our institute in Prague. So, after this short introduction, I will ask Ramsey Foundation, the project leader, and we will listen then to a keynote paper by my colleague from the Faculty of Humanities, Charles University, Jana Volmut-Markupova, on the memories of the 17th November 1989 in the Czech environment. A panel then is organized with the title Before and After, where each involved team will present the experiences from the interview recordings. After this, a short return to the Czech or Czechoslovak environment will be offered through a documentary on memories of November 1989. It is partly compatible with the keynote speech. And before the webinar, the second panel, then is organized second panel, more concentrated on interviews and interpretations, presentation of preliminary outputs, findings, and some ideas of the teams. Before the webinar conclusion, the representative of Past Not Past Paris will present photos from the exhibition Europe in Flux, and I'm pleased to announce that Paola Capuzzo, representing Ramsey Foundation, full professor of contemporary history from University in Bologna, will provide us with final remarks on the collection of interviews. It is a rather long program for one online meeting. That is why there is not much time for discussion. Still, I believe we can discuss the main points at the end of each section and in the form of a conclusion too. Because of this, I ask you kindly to keep the schedule as announced in the program. It means from 5 to 9 minutes. And to save time, it's recommended to use also the tool chat. And this is the last slide, last picture from our institute. And now I would like to ask Maria Chiara and Matilde for the introduction.
Okay, thank you, Lenka. And on behalf of the Fondazione Gramsci Emilia Romagna, we would like to thank the Institute of Contemporary History in Prague, and in particular Professor Lenka Krátká, for organizing this second international event. It is a real pleasure for us to be here with you today, even if only virtually. We have gone through difficult moments in these months, and we believe that even an event like this is a step towards a return to normality. The results of the work carried out by our working groups, which will be presented today, are a demonstration of the willingness of the entire working group to continue the path of this project that we started in autumn of 2019, and which had to deal with the health emergency that affected the lives of all of us. Today, we hope to be able to continue in the coming months with the planned activities, with the same perseverance and collaborative spirit we had up to now. So thanks to all of you for being here today.
Yeah. So, thank you. And now Now I would like to invite my colleague, as announced, Jana Volmut-Markupova. I will open her presentation. I will switch computer to her.
Okay, so hello everybody. Thank you very much for having me and for inviting me to give a speech at this event, in this webinar or online conference, whatever we call it. The topic of my speech will be, as you can see, the meaning of the 17th November 1989 in the memory of former student protagonists in Czech Republic. But before I start talking about our recent project that was finished last year, I would like to give you like a brief context what this project is, how it started, and what were its first goals and how it ended. So here you can see 2 books, or actually you can see almost 5 books or 4. But the first one, which is called 100 Student Revolutions, it's on the left, is the first project which started in 1990s, and it was conducted by Miroslav Vaněk and Milan Otahan. It was actually the first Czech oral history project, and its goal was to record interviews with students or former university students who were somehow active in the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia in 1989. The main goal was not to like analyze those people's narratives, but it was to describe how the revolution happened, what the role of students was, and how they got there. Also, it is worth noting that this project actually started oral history in the Czech Republic. It then led to creating the Center for Oral History at this institute, and so on. So this book was published in 1999, and then we had like 15 years of doing various researches. My colleagues focused on like working class people, ordinary people, former dissidents, former political elites. But 15 years later, they decided, or we decided sort of, to return to this project and to follow up with this group of narrators. So around 5 years ago, we decided to contact these narrators, these former student activists again, and to re-approach them, to reconnect with them, and to ask them a rather simple but also very complex question, which was, what happened in your life since the last interview? And even though we didn't expect them to talk about the Velvet Revolution, it showed that even though they were talking about their life stories since the 1990s to the present, the experience from the Velvet Revolution was still very much present and very much active in those narratives, even though they weren't talking precisely about the 1989. So this then led us to grasping the whole topic and using a concept or a perspective on this research, which is called a symbolic center. It means that we saw Velvet Revolution as a symbolic center, which is a concept used by Professor Miloš Havelka, which means that he sees or analyzes like milestones or historical events in the Czech history as somewhat different, something that is full of symbols, that these events are sort of different from other events. They can be like symbols for a defeat or a victory. And Velvet Revolution as such, as an event, which is very strong in terms of a symbolic, is probably the most recent one of them. So even though he analyzes symbolic centers in a way that are not very, very known, we transferred this concept onto oral history interviews. And the main question was, what role does the experience from the Velvet Revolution play in the lives of former student activists from 1989? And what does it mean even now? Because in reaction to the initial question that we asked them, which was, what value do you associate with the Velvet Revolution? We would usually get a quick answer, which was freedom and democracy. No, Velvet Revolution for us is freedom and democracy. But that would be quite brief if we ended up there. So we took a rather like closer look and actually explored the narratives and saw that there are two or maybe three different but also very interconnected strategies about how these people connect with their experience from the Velvet Revolution. I named them as revolution as a commitment, revolution as a fulfilled obligation, and revolution as a prepared coincidence. I would like to know that I use these terms only like as ideal types, as Max Weber would put it. But more importantly, what do these strategies actually mean in oral history interviews? We will now take a look at the first of them, which is revolution as a commitment. This could be like a first group of those narrators. I should probably note that we had 100 narrators in this project in the first phase in the 1990s and also in the second phase that we conducted a few years ago. And the first group of tens of people could be defined, or its characteristics could be that the revolution, which they see as a fulfillment or success, or fulfillment of getting the values that they associated with the Velvet Revolution, which was freedom and democracy, that it means that they feel sort of obliged to still be active in public life and to take care of public affairs. Some of those narrators did engage in politics, but only a few of them. Many more of them would start working at cultural institutions, in education, but all of them are still like active citizens or are active in the public life. They would often say that they like to attend demonstrations, they like to sign petitions, and this activity in public life was something that was very typical for them. In their narratives, the revolution almost plays like the crucial role because they say, well, we were sort of engaged in the Velvet Revolution. We as university students started the demonstration. We were active in the general strike and so on and so on. And so therefore, we are sort of responsible for what we are living right now. Those narrators somehow feel sort of responsible for the state of public affairs, and they say that they are almost obliged to still take care of it, you know, to keep, like watching what's happening, and if there's something bad in their perspective happening, they should speak up. And obviously the reason or the question was, what does have to happen for you to speak up? And the answer was, well, I must feel that the legacy of the Velvet Revolution is in danger, which obviously is something that, you know, everybody will explain differently. What does it mean that the legacy is in danger? But for this group of narrators, this experience is still like active, it's still open, and it still like affects their life even now. Not maybe now today, but in these years. And also it's worth noting that there's an important role of the older generation, because this first group of narrators would often mention that the crucial moment was when they realized that the older generation of former dissidents like Václav Havel and Jiří Dienstbier is now leaving, you know, because it all happened in the last decade. When Václav Havel died in 2011, so did Jiří Dienstbier. And these narrators say, well, I mean, now it's up to us. Now it's up to us to take care of public affairs. The second group of narrators, I called revolution as a fulfilled obligation. Since the first group said, now it's up to us because the older generation is leaving or can't be active anymore, for this group of narrators, I think the crucial moment is not the leaving of the older generation, but the younger generation coming to adulthood. Because even these narrators will say that the revolution was somewhat crucial for them, was important for them, was like a milestone in their lives, but it didn't mean that they had to stay active. They would often say, well, yeah, I mean, I feel sort of responsible, but now it's not up to me, it's now up to them. And the them meant the younger generation. So these narrators would often use the strategy of talking about the Velvet Revolution as a crucial event in their lives, but they would say, no, I've had my revolution, now it's up to my kids. As you can see in the slide, where Petra Marková says, I heard that once in a lifetime you are supposed to make one, meaning the revolution, is their own business and their decision now. So for this group of people, this is crucial to understand their activities even now. While the first group, who wants to stay active, would be also very eager to share their memories publicly and to attend the anniversaries or celebrations of anniversaries and talk to the media about their experience. For this group, it is something much more personal, and they would rather share the memories with their kids. They would rather stay in the private, but the strength of the symbol is pretty much the same. But anyway, since for the first group, like the symbol of the Velvet Revolution was still active and still open and still has some influence on their life, for this second group, it's much more passive or much more closed. It's something that just happened. We've had our revolution and now it's up to our kids. The third one, which is called rather weirdly, revolution as a prepared coincidence, is somewhat different from the two. The two that I've mentioned, the difference between the two I was talking about was rather in the question of like, are we supposed to stay active or can we be passive because we've already had our revolution? But they would say, yeah, there are some ideals, some values of the Velvet Revolution that have to like be protected, and we should fight for them, and we should take care of the democracy that we now have. For this third group, which is rather the smallest one from the three, I would say that this relationship to the Velvet Revolution, to what happened in 1989, is the most complicated one. Even though these narrators would also say that, you know, it was a crucial moment for us and we were lucky that we, you know, went through it and we could be there, they wouldn't see their participants as something they would predetermine them to do anything else. They would say it could be anyone else. I was just at the right place in the right time, but it doesn't mean pretty much anything else. I was there, anyone could be there. I was the one, but that's all. Also, their relationship to the Velvet Revolution and to seeing the values of the revolution or what the revolution brought is much more complicated, because since for the two groups I was talking about, it wasn't much of a question. You know, it wasn't much of a question of like, was it really a revolution? Was it a good revolution? Was it a good event? Was it a good change? For this third group, this question is not so easy, because they would say, well, you know, we know that the students, the university students actually played some role in this event. We may even imagine that it was somewhat prepared, that it was somewhat, you know, influenced by events, like general events, by the large history, and we only play some role. And from this perspective, they are much more skeptical. You know, they are not the idealists. They are much more skeptical, more pragmatical, and they do not have the really like romantic relationship towards the revolution. But still, on a personal level, they would still, you know, keep talking about seeing revolution as something that we should be skeptical about, and we should really analyze it and be really critical about it, and we should not just talk about values, but we should really talk about like how it happened and who made what deal with whom. But on a personal level, they would still talk about the revolution and the way that they could be active in it. It's about like some like a personal milestone. So for I don't think for any of the 100 narrators we could really talk about like some negative relationship towards the Velvet Revolution. There are just very different types of strategies in which these narrators talk about this experience. But still, since I was talking about the first largest two groups, I often mention that they feel somewhat responsible. You know, that they feel responsible for the state of public affairs in Czech Republic even now, that they feel responsible for what happened after the Velvet Revolution, which was something that I just couldn't foresee and I couldn't understand before I started digging into their narratives even deeper and deeper. And it showed, in my opinion, which is, it's a hypothesis. It's not an explanation that could be, you know, it's not objective. But the explanation was via Václav Havel, because Havel, as a symbol and a person, was definitely one of the most often mentioned public figures in our interviews, which is pretty much obvious, because since he was, you know, the main symbol of the Czechoslovak descent and also the Velvet Revolution, it does make sense that these people would talk about him the most often. But in the 1990s, when he was still an active politician and he was a public figure and, you know, he was active in the politics, they would talk about him like a person. You know, you're like one of the politicians who did something, and we may be critical towards it, and we might have like different opinions than he does, and so on. But a few years ago, when we recorded our interviews in like 2017, 2018, which was 6, respectively 7 years after he died, in these interviews, he almost wasn't like a real person anymore, because these narrators would often mention him as a symbol. You know, as a symbol of revolution. What Havel did, or what Havel would say, was somewhat connected with the revolution and with their own personal experience of it. So when I mentioned the like the symbol of responsibility, or being responsible for the state of public affairs, I had to focus more on this relationship between the former students and Václav Havel. And Havel, obviously, in the 70s and 80s, did publish several essays and other texts and documents, and he would often talk about civil society. He would analyze it, he would analyze the role of every individual in a state, and he would talk about like what it meant to be a citizen of a country. In the 1990 and later after he became a president, he would often open this topic in his speeches, and in his speeches, like presidential speeches, he would often try to motivate the citizens, the Czechoslovaks, and Czechs and Slovaks, to build a strong civil society. Now, what did he actually say? There were several topics that he would mention and motives or symbols that he would use. And the first one was obviously that he would talk about everyone's responsibility for the state of public affairs for the world that we live in, to put it really pathetically. He would criticize the idea of living in a democracy where citizens just, you know, vote every 4 or 5 years and then just hand over the responsibility and the power to the politicians. He would really try to motivate people to enter the politics or to build civil society. He tried to motivate precisely young people to be active in like local communities, local politics. And for this reason, I had to analyze this aspect even further, because in what Havel said in the 1989 and 1990, and what our narrators said in 1990s and then a few years ago, there was like a strong connection between that. Because even though his calling for young people to enter the politics wasn't very successful, because only a few of our narrators are active politicians, and even though some of them spent a few years in the politics, they would soon leave and choose other different like career path. The idea of being active in the local community and thinking about responsibility and building civil society was much more heard in this group of narrators, because yes, they're not active politicians, but they stay active in the local communities. And the most important is that even though they have different jobs, that we had teachers, we had scientists, we had journalists, we had different people who work like in cultural institutions or non-profit organizations, or even a few businessmen. All of them would often say, well, it's not just a job. We kind of feel like it can contribute to building a civil society. You can contribute to the society. We can do something good. We don't just want to generate profit, which is rather a symbolical way to put it. But we kind of feel that we can, in this way, also contribute to building the society that Havel wanted after the revolution, which is interesting, because when I asked them, well, you're known, everybody knows you in a community that you live in, why don't you want to be active in politics? And he would say, and they would say, well, because I can do more like this. So when I ask them, like, what's the reason they like this job so much? They would say, well, because I can be free while doing it. I can organize my time as much as I want to. I've got the freedom in my work, which is obviously one of the two values that they connect with the Velvet Revolution. And second was, well, I feel that through my work or through my job, I can really cultivate and do something meaningful in my society or my community, rather than if I was a local politician. So even though Havel's calling for people to enter the politics wasn't pretty much successful and wasn't, objectively speaking, his motivations to motivate these people, they were active in the Velvet Revolution, to be active in the civil society and to feel somewhat responsible for it, was, as our interviews actually show. And in our interviews in the 90s and even a few years ago, our narrators would often admit that in 1989 they thought that they fought for freedom and democracy, but many of them would add, but we had no idea what it meant. So in this way, we can almost see Havel and his speeches and his motivations as some like a manual that they accepted from him. Obviously not all of them, but in his interviews, I think it's pretty apparent that the motives that he tried to pass on to the younger generations were pretty much successful. But obviously that would take much more time and much more talking to really talk this through. So I shall keep the schedule and I will thank you for your attention and thank you for having me.
So thank you, Anna, a lot for an interesting presentation, and I think it's inspiring also for our project. It's a way how to work with interviews, how to interpret them. And now we can start with the first section titled Before and After. Either we can before and after Velvet Revolution, or the fall of the Berlin Wall, but also before and after our current pandemic situation. It depends on your point of view and your papers. I will ask all the participants to keep the list. I think Roberto will present as the first one, then Teresa, Klaus, Mateusz, and I will conclude the section. So please, Roberto, present us your experiences of interview recording.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me share the screen with you. Can you see the slides? Can you see the slides?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So thank you very much, and good afternoon, and thank you for setting up this very interesting and stimulating seminar for our project. As you know, I will give you a very short overview of the interviews conducted in Italy to date, with a premise as far as interviews I personally conducted so far, they were mostly held before the outbreak of the pandemic. So I will refrain to reflect on this relationship between the before and after the start of the COVID pandemic. Maybe my colleague Teresa Malice will briefly reflect on these aspects later. But let me start by showing you the list of the interviews conducted to date. As you can see, we collected oral memories of people like Achille Occhetto, the last Secretary General of the Italian Communist Party, or Massimo D'Alema, Romano Prodi. So let's say top level policymakers at the national and international level, but also people like Valerio Monteventi or Simona Brighetti, who are local activists and intellectual, mainly linked to the territory of Bologna, our city. But also people like Analia Guglielmi, who represented a sort of bridge between Bologna and Poland during the 1980s and during the emergence of Solidarność movement. So we basically tried to develop a multi-layered group of people to be interviewed. But which was the rationale behind the selection process and the choice of people to be interviewed? Well, first we aimed at collecting the memories and the perception of people who had a sort of privileged look at the events of 1989 and the fall of the Berlin Wall, in a sense by overturning the famous Eric J. Hobsbawm's claim about the cognitive privilege of studying history from the point of view of subalterns. We did the opposite in a sense. And we started by collecting memories of people like Occhetto, D'Alema, Prodi, and so on and so forth. But suddenly we realized how these memories how little these memories could tell us about the impact that 1989 and the collapse of the Soviet system, the fall of the Berlin Wall, had on the local territory of Bologna and the Emilia-Romagna region, which is a focus, which is an aspect, a target of our analysis, which is crucial to our current research. So in a sense, we try to combine a sort of threefold level of analysis. So we are trying to collect oral memories at the national level, the local level, but also translocal level. If we think and look at the experience of Analia Guglielmi, as I just said. With respect to the questions, so how were the questions conceived, and which were the main issues to be addressed to our interviewed people? First and foremost, of course, the memory of the Berlin Wall and the fall of the Berlin Wall, the impact that the fall of the Berlin Wall had on Europe and the process of European integration during the 1990s and up to the process of enlargement that took place in the mid-2000s. The collapse of the USSR and the collapse of the Soviet system as a whole. Then we also, and maybe this is a link with the speech we have just heard, we always try to stimulate a reflection about the 1989 as revolution with the question mark. So did our interviewed perceive 1989 as proper revolutions? And this is an open question that we usually discuss during our interviews. And finally, we tried to detect the link or the plural linkages that exist between the fall of the Berlin Wall and the existence of current walls in our contemporary and current times. And when we speak about current walls, we usually refer to issues such as human rights, citizenship, migration, and the transformation that ongoing European politics are experiencing in these days. A further step refers to methodological issues. As you know better than me, at least as far as the Italian tradition of oral history is concerned, this discipline stemmed from research in the history of working class. So basically, first oral historians, first scholars, aimed at exploring, analyzing, and somehow listening to the voice of people who had been deprived of that voice for centuries. Our approach is quite different, of course. We interviewed people who are all but subalterns, and this is blatant. But the very linkage between the, let's say, Italian tradition of oral history and our methodological approach is our need to find and to stimulate the emergence of a dimension that belongs to both the interviewer and the person being interviewed. That is to say, the dimension of subjectivity. We always try to activate a sort of mutual interaction between the subjectivity of the interviewer and subjectivity of the person being interviewed, trying to use the fall of the Berlin Wall and the 1989 as a sort of catalyst of memory, rather than exploring the general biographies, the general political commitment of these people. We always try to use the symbol, let's say, if you will, of 1989 and the collapse and fall of the Berlin Wall as a sort of catalyst of memory, which allows us to explore the very features and the ingredients of the feelings that characterize the memory of those people. So the spectrum of feelings which are connected to the fall of the Berlin Wall, from hope to fear, expectations, and we also try to explore the changes that occurred in those perceptions, about the feelings, about the sentiments, let's say, of the fall of the Berlin Wall in the memories of these people during time. So over the past 30 years, So how these feelings, how this perception changed over time is a further aspect of our own approach to these interviews. And just to mention a couple of first insights about which we can discuss later in the following session. As far as the interviews to people who belong to the Italian Communist Party, or if you will, the communist movement as a whole, my impression is that they usually show a sort of loose memory, a sort of elusive memory when they talk about the fall of the Berlin Wall and the 1989 and the end of the communist system, if you will. When I speak about loose memories, elusive memories, I refer to the fact that they tend to depict the Berlin Wall as a sort of marginal aspect of their own political interest, of their own political self-perception, and in the building up of their own biographies. But suddenly things change when the Berlin Wall fell down. At that point, it seems to me that the Berlin Wall gains some momentum and gains some a specific place and a specific meaning in their own memories. So in a sense, it seems to me that such elusive memory tells us that the wall stops to be something marginal only when it disappears, only when it falls down. And I do think that this is a sort of clue that we can discuss together, which still deserves to be further investigated, not only with respect to the experience and the oral memories of the former Italian communists, but maybe if we want to look at what happened in the transformation of European citizenship perception of the 1989 and the fall of the Berlin Wall at the European level, this can be an aspect which probably deserves to be further investigated. I'm not sure if I have time to go, but basically I will stop here and I will leave the floor to my colleagues in order to go on with the discussion. Do you hear me? Okay.
Thank you very much, Roberto, and hello to everyone. Good afternoon. Perhaps I'm also going to share the screen. 1 second. Roberto, you have to stop sharing the screen.
Yeah, sorry. Okay.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So can you all see?
Yeah, we are.
Okay, so I'm Teresa Malice for the Gramsci Foundation. I took care also of the German side of the interviews, which I'm trying to reflect on briefly today. I'm very grateful to Roberto, as he already introduced the questions and the methodology on which we reflected and worked together as a team, and something short about the set of questions. They are similar to the ones that I also used for the German interviews, but obviously with a stronger focus on the German experiences. So that goes without saying. Here's a short overview of the interviews. They are 4 overall, to Hans Motov, Gesine Oltmanns, Gizella Callenbach, and Rolf Sprink. As you can see, only one has been conducted in February, so before the corona crisis exploded, so to say, and the other ones were conducted in August. I have to say that I didn't really perceive, it didn't come out from the interviews almost anything, I would say anything about the COVID-19. So as a topic, it was not really present, obviously, though
There were delays and postponements because of the crisis. It took a while to organize the German interviews in Leipzig, but it was possible in the end. I will start from the one interview I conducted in Berlin, and the protagonist of the interview is Hans Motov. Probably most of you or some of you already know who he is, prominent politician of the former German Democratic Republic. He's still alive and is 92 years old, so he accepted to be interviewed by the Gramsci Foundation. Something short about his biography. He was born in 1928 in Jasenic, which today is in Poland. He briefly served the Wehrmacht towards the end of the Second World War, and he was made a prisoner by the Soviet troops in May 1945, and he was brought to a prisoner of war camp close to Moscow, where he stayed until 1949, and he was receiving a Marxist-Leninist education. In 1949, which is the very same year in which the German Democratic Republic was built as an Eastern counterpart to the Bundesrepublik, he joined the Socialist Unity Party, the SED, and the Freie Deutsche Jugend, the Free German Youth. He studied in Moscow and Berlin and graduated in economics. He was a party leader and secretary of the party in Dresden since 1973. And is considered faithful to the line, let's say, but one of the exponents of the groups of the reformers. He was one of the few party leaders who criticized the party secretary at that time, Erich Honecker, who was in power from 1971 until October 1981 and 89, sorry. And he had close contacts with Gorbachev even before he became a Soviet leader. After the German reunification, he entered the PDS, the Party of the Democratic Socialism, which since the 2007 renamed and changed, being called Die Linke. He was a member of the Bundestag and also in the mid-2000s of the European Parliament. He's considered in general a controversial figure for many reasons, for his role and activity in the old GDR, and also because of his role during the Wende in 1989-1990. He was obviously a protagonist of the Wende, but from the side of the regime, of the dictatorship of the GDR. During the peaceful revolution in East Germany in October 1989, he ordered the repression of a demonstration in Dresden in order to re-establish the order on October 4 and 5. And he has a role in the sense that after the resignation of Willi Stoph, Hans Motov became the last chairman of the GDR Council of Ministers before the last elections in the GDR in March 1990. First contact with him as an interviewee happened in Milan for this book fair, Book City, in November 2019. He was there to present the Italian translation of his memoir, which appeared originally, you can see it on the left, in German in 1998, and it was published many years later from Mimesis, this Italian publishing house, in 2019 in Italian. So he came there for this reason. There we met, we had a first talk, and we agreed that we would meet soon in Berlin, which eventually happened. We met on February 25, 2020, in the Central Party headquarters of Die Linke, as he requested, and this is also obviously a symbolic element that is central in the interview interpretation. Motov is still nowadays president of the Council of the Elderly of Die Linke. I will go quickly to the interviews in Leipzig now, just to continue with the overview. The contact here was slightly different because we went through the municipality of Leipzig, which gave to the Gramsci Foundation the contact of the Foundation Peaceful Revolution, the Stiftung Friedliche Revolution. I took contact with one of the responsibles, Gesine Oltmans, who invited me then to Leipzig to interview her, Gizella Callenbach and Rolf Spring as three of the protagonists of the civil rights movement. The interview setting is interesting also in this sense, because it's the venue, the headquarter of the Stiftung is exactly in front of the Nikolaikirche, which was the symbolic place par excellence of the events of October 1989. And as you can see from the window, the interview took place exactly in front of the Kirche. That is a piece of the church. This is Gesine Oltmans, the first interviewees and one of the most active members of the Stiftung, my contact. Very quickly, with some hotspots, she was born in 1965. She was, and her family was, a member of the church. So since she was religious, she did not participate to the youth organizations of the GDR, which was quite unusual for that time. She moved to Leipzig in the early 80s, trying to study at the university, but she was denied access to the university because of her church belonging to. She worked in many places, but she was in contact mostly with the environments of music, art, and literature, where prohibited texts and ideas were started to circulate. But most of all, she was visiting very often the Nikolaikirche since the mid-1980s, of which I just talked, which provided one of the few spaces for open discussion at that time. And she participated to the Friedensgebete, the Monday peace prayers, which took place every Monday at the Nikolaikirche, and she was active in general in the movement for civil rights. Second interviewee, Gizella Callenbach. She was born in 1944 in Soldin, today also in Poland. She also had a Christian education. She also was denied the high school graduation, the Abitur, because of her religious education. She managed to study anyway, and she became a chemical engineer, and over the years she became interested in environmental issues. Her civil rights movement belonging, so to say, happens in these environmental groups active in the GDR, and she lives 1989 also through this experience. She became, in the 2000s, from 2004 to 2009, member of the European Parliament with the Grüne, with the Green Party. So environment is a central aspect for her. Last but not least, Rolf Sprink, born in 1950 in Görlitz. He came to Leipzig to study at the university. He was also a church sympathizer and member. He worked for publishing, various publishing houses. And he came into contact, he was among the founders of the Neues Forum, which was this political movement towards the end of the GDR. And he also contributed by creating a publishing house forum, which was proceeding from the experience of the new forum. It was one of the first citizens' initiatives from the late GDR, where people from all professions, all parties, and all groups were participating in order to ask for more democratic reforms. I conclude now with some general comments that we may use for discussion later. First of all, it may sound obvious, but Hans Motov and the other three interviewees had very different points of view on the peaceful revolution. Motov, from the side of the regime, tends to avoid this narration, whereas obviously the live narration as well of the civil rights activists is centered absolutely on the peaceful revolution. 1989, I asked about that, and all of the interviewees, I would say, agree on the fact that 1989 is made on many small watersheds, which are not necessarily the fall of the Berlin Wall. So it's not necessarily the central aspect. In the Leipzig interviews, there is, in some cases, the stress on the reform of the GDR as the main aim of the peaceful revolution, and not necessarily the one of the reunification of Germany. This came more or less as a surprise, and it came later. About the wall, Motov, from his position, tends obviously to justify it as necessary because of Cold War dynamics, retrospectively speaking. Other interviewees tend to see it as a divisive symbol. And last, Europe after 1989 emerges in all narrations as a larger geographical and political concept, which does not coincide with the idea of the European Union. And I hope we can discuss these elements later. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Klaus is prepared for presentation, I think. Thank you, Teresa. I will ask him to unmute. So Klaus, hello, are you prepared for sharing your ideas with us?
Maybe I can proceed, and after that we try with Klaus. Again, good afternoon. My name is Mateusz Pawlikowski, and I represent History Meeting House in Warsaw. And I will manage in this section without visual presentation. Since we established this axis before and after pandemic crisis, I should start from our proceedings before COVID-19. At the beginning, our team created a schedule, a plan of making interviews. History Meeting House is experienced in registering testimonies of direct witnesses, because we have some additional branch in our institution, Oral History Archive, where our historians professionally register oral testimonies. And with them, we discussed our plan. We used their experience in planning our project. So we created our schedule of making 5 different interviews with 5 different interviewees with various backgrounds and professions, such as photographer, bureaucrat, journalist, and academic teacher of history. Also, something which is very important for us is making interviews in different, various, diverse locations, such as library, classroom, History Meeting House, our residence, or a private space of the narrator. And in order to fulfill our premises, we must have postponed our work for a new stable period regarding the pandemic crisis and pandemic fear of meetings. So we started the exact actual work in September. So far, we have already registered 3 interviews, and we are on a post-production stage, mainly translation. And in next 2 weeks, we have 2 appointments with 2 next interviewees. Last but not least in this section from me is our idea. In History Meeting House, we decided to invite secondary school students to participate with us in making this project, since our project title of our project is Breaching the Walls, We Do Need Education. So we came across with the idea of students who ask questions, who conduct interviews after preparation, after appropriate lesson of history, because students, children, teenagers has their natural freshness, their natural curiosity of that events of 1989. Because I also want to underline something that in Polish history program in schools, many teachers, because of lack of time and history in Second World War period. So events of 1989, transformation of 19th aren't well known among Polish students. Thus, we also make additional job, additional task, creating interviews and also making project with students. Thank you.
Thank you a lot. So we can try Klaus. Are you on?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, because I just tried from my phone. So, hello everybody. First of all, nice to join the community because it's the first time for me to contact you. And I have nothing to show on slides or something else, but I will try to give you some main events that happened in Albania during the beginning of the 90s, in the July of 1990, there was the entrance of a man called Uli Bodinaku, who entered the German embassy with his Skoda. So he just, let's say, breached the wall. Can you hear me?
Hello, everything is okay.
Okay, because due to the fact that I don't have any video, maybe it would be good if it will be in an interactive session with me, so you can ask me and I can answer your questions, but maybe just some minutes later. And we have contacted this man called Uli Bodinaku. And asked him for his experience. And also we have, so first we have interviewed people with low public profile because we need sincere narratives, and we didn't trust to ask those who today are still politically engaged or partially engaged. So we have only people like a prisoner who went in prison in 1976 only because he created some antennas for his TV by cans. It's a very, very interesting history.
Yeah.
And later on 1986, he went out of prison, but in 1991, he was one of the people who pulled the cables that took down the monument of the dictator Enver Hoxha. So he was one of the actors, let's say, in those protests. Then we have two people now living in a different city and also a different state. So one of them is he lives in Vlora, and the other one is a lady. She lives now in USA, and they were both part of the student protests in December, in 8th December 1990. And there they were part also of the meeting that was made there then with ex-leader of the Communist Party, Ramiz Alia. So these are all interviews taken with actors of these events. but not, let's say, high profile or politicians or politically engaged people. Also, we thought it would be interesting to have an interview with someone who was in prison in those years where everything happened, to have an idea, was there any fluctuation in the emotions of this community, in their hopes, and so let's say, what did they felt when the Berlin Wall was taken down, or when Ceausescu was executed in Romania. So one of the main questions that we thought it would be nice to interview everyone, so all the 5 people, was, is the Berlin Wall the most important event that impacted Albania, or maybe there are some other events like the division of the Soviet Union or the execution of Ceausescu in Romania? Were there more important than the fall of the Berlin Wall? And I can assure you that many people think that the execution of Ceausescu in Romania was one of the main reasons that the regime, the totalitarian regime in Albania, went out, let's say, in a quiet way. So there was no killings, there were no victims in Albania in these protests, only 4 of them in Shkodër, but it was not something like in Romania or somewhere else where there were even more victims and it was more tragic, let's say. So if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer, because I don't know even what were the main points that I had to say.
Thank you, Klaus. I think it was a nice presentation, and you touched the main points and presented your set of interviews.
Okay.
I would like to conclude this first section with my presentation and with our set of interviews. In this short overview, first I will present the necessary information on our set of 10 interviews we have done. Then I will touch some of the questions concerning the webinar topic before and after. I will stress our field work, contacts with narrators, interview recording before the pandemic situation and after. It means in the Czech environment before March the 15th and in summer again. Today we are in the course of another epidemic wave, and I think today our experiences with interview recording would be more or less different than in summer. The first message here is that in oral history we always get information and knowledge not only about the past and the topic, but also about our present times. And in the beginning, I would like to introduce you my colleague Lucie, who made a substantial part of the work and recorded half of the interviews. Unfortunately, she is not online at the moment. She's recording an interview for our project on business trips during the Cold War period. So you can see her only in the picture. Well, let's get back to the set of interviews. Together we did 10 interviews. Albeit we did not explicitly plan it. We have 5 interviews with men and 5 with women. The narrators, as you see on the screen, the narrators were born in the turn of the 40s, then in the 60s, the majority of them, also in the 70s, one in the 1980, and one, and the youngest narrator, in the 1990s. Thus, from the point of view of the age and experience from the society before and after the Velvet Revolution, the transition to democracy, they cover 40 years from the communist revolution in 1948 until today. Concerning the project topic, they experienced the fall of the Berlin Wall and regaining freedom in a different age, from the oldest woman, who was 40 in 1989, to the youngest man, born a year after the Velvet Revolution in 1990. What is essential and inspiring for the project is that all the narrators experience a democratic society and market economy in their productive age. And the majority of them can compare their life and jobs and working careers in the times before the transition to freedom and after. It means during the state socialism period and after the Velvet Revolution. Following the main project idea, wars, freedom, change, and those concepts, we concentrated on two regions. The first was the capital Prague, the big city, and contrary to this, a small village in the west of Bohemia near the German border, West Germany, during the Cold War. In those times, the people experienced through this border proximity of the bipolar division of the world. The West was so close and so far at the same time. So that's why we decided to make interviews in this region. From the education or strata point of view, we recorded interviews with university graduates, 6 of them. One graduated from the military university, and 4 people were formerly secondary school students or graduates. And now 2 of them are studying university. As a result, I feel a weak point of the interview set is that people with primary education and those who only completed apprenticeship without a high school diploma are not represented. To some extent, the social class is represented by one narrator who experienced a homeless in his teenage. On the other hand, and it is benefit of the interviews, there are represented people from various fields, including those from politics and local politics, those influencing public opinion or young generations, I mean teachers, researchers, and there are represented also so-called ordinary people like, for example, accounting officers. We started contacting narrators and recording interviews shortly after the Velvet Revolution's 30th anniversary we celebrated last year. So people remember the revolution, November 1989, very well, also with the help of media and various events organized for the anniversary. As a result, they were not surprised we are conducting the project with the fall of the Berlin Wall topic and all the subsequent historical moments and change of the regime in Czechoslovakia. Then we have to interrupt the works, as you all did, because of the COVID-19 crisis and quarantine. After the several months period, it was not easy to convince people again to spend time with us for recording interviews on a given topic. The main problem was not a fear of meeting other people potentially perceived as dangerous in the previous month. The problems arose from the fact that people suddenly did not feel the project is important in the light of the worldwide pandemic and their personal situation. Their life priorities have changed dramatically, and I think I will stop this short presentation here in this moment. Maybe this is a new topic for international comparison, for sharing experiences from various teams. So thank you for the moment. And I think in our program, we are at the moment when you should say the document. It's a documentary film, Youth to Use, the Freedom Mosaics, and it is, I think there is a link with the project Jana presented to you. I hope everything will run correctly. Give me a moment. So. Já to tam... So give me a second. I will try because I can run it from web. So give me a second. Já jsem to měla tady. Tady. So I think now everything will run. Share screen.
Sorry, Lenka, the volume is off.
Yeah.
We can't hear anything.
Yeah. I got a message from my colleague, so we try it again.
Informace. Nezapřicám se. To si myslím, že ty generace přede mnou jako noví neměli.
No a kdo z nich bude mezi 86 přijatými? To už záleželo především na nich, ale také trochu.
Vůbec mě nenapadlo, že vlastně, abych mohl být učitelem, tak prezentovat prostě nějakou politiku.
Že bude normální zboží v obchodech. Jednou tady se nás člověk bude moci větší.
Další stánek textil. Co můžete lidem nabídnout?
Mám plavky dámský, dětský i pánský a docela výběr i v barvách. I nemám trička. Ty jsou i v dětských velikostech.
Prodala by se?
Prodala by se. Zájem je tu veliký.
Že jakoby bude patřit do té Evropy, tak to taky bylo prostě hodnota.
Teď teda jako budeme moc říkat tu pravdu.
Jsme dlouho poslouchali z Ameriky. Mně to nepřišlo, že by to bylo něco, co by nemělo přijít.
Nejpříjemnější však je velmi pěkné, čisté a upravené prostředí. Kolik tu teď máte turistů?
Tady asi 38.
Já si nějak představit, že to bylo nějaké Ale popravdě řečeno jsem si ani nedovedl představit, ani s fikem, jak vypadá ten svět.
Ta svoboda je strašně zajímavá. Tenkrát to byl pro ně pojem, kterému měli daleko, ke kterému se chtěli jakoby dostat. Vlastně niterně to cítili, že to je něco, co nemají, co chybí společnosti.
Toho 17. listopadu prostě na ten Albertov zdaleka nečekali, že tím jako něco začíná, tak nebrali. Ještě byli studenti, kteří byli naštvaní a chtěli být svobodní.
Kdyby to bylo včera, ty vzpomínky jsou tak pestrý a tak jako intenzivní.
To bylo totálně, absolutně nejintenzivnější období mého života.
Já to mám fakt hlavně docela jako film a ten už z té palice nikdo nevybažit.
Jsem si potvrdila, že prostě že nepatřím jenom těm, co jakoby nadávali v té hospodě.
To byla asi poprvé naposledy, kdy jsem cítila takovou nějakou úžasnou sounáležitost mezi lidmi, kteří se navzájem vůbec neznají.
Listopad 89 si to spojuji asi nejvíc s mládím a s nějakou nadějí.
Vlastně ten listopad v mém osobním životě je vlastně takový úplně zásadní předěl.
Vůbec nedovedu představit, že by nebyl.
No a pak přišel teda ten 17. listopad.
No, to se není možné. Chlapi, tady jsou tisíce lidí. Někteří tam šplhali, že jo, na nějaký ty výlohy nebo na stromy, aby aspoň byli nahoře a viděli.
Dnes vzpomínáme našich předchůdců, kteří neváhali nasadit svůj život při obraně práv, která považovali za nezadatelná. Práva na vzdělání, práva na akademické svobody.
To shromáždění na Albertově a pak národní třídy byl určitě silný zážitek.
V té době jsem jako těžký fér nosil po dědovi takhle silný eisenpoňácký kabát. Tenhle kabát mě to zachránil, protože já jsem se dostal v těch prvních záplatí národní. A schytali jsme to teda dost. To byl moment, kdy si vlastně v tu chvilku vyříče, že takhle už nejde. To už prostě nejde.
Vlastně to jsem byl u Tchána, který poslouchal z Ameriky nebo Svobodnou Evropu a on to na mě začal chrlit.
Už v sobotu 18. jsem navštívil své další přátele a už jsme začali připravovat stávkový výbor.
Tak vlastně si pamatuju ten odjezd do Plzně na kolej, jakoby plný toho, co se bude dít, toho očekávání, jako že teď teda už to prasklo a něco se stane a že teda musíme i riskovat, že prostě nás třeba vyhodí ze školy, nebo když to nedopadne.
V neděli toho 19. jsme už vyhlásili to, že vstupujeme jako studenti do stávky veřejně už v několika divadlech.
Zítra je stávka studentů a nejde se do školy.
Kdo dovolí a je ochoten přihlížet, ne-li velet tomu, co se na národní třídě dělo, nemůže být v čele státu v centru civilizované Evropy. 18. listopadu se studenti některých fakult rozhodli vyhlásit prozatím týdenní stávku. Studenti vyzývají všechny ostatní fakulty, instituce a podniky k následování.
V Ostravě se mi vybaví první studentská demonstrace, kde bylo asi 20 lidí, 20 studentů. Děkan nebo proděkan se nám posmíval a říkal nám, no to je zima, vás to přestane bavit za chvilku, že jo, holky. A já myslím, že zítra bude po stávce.
Na úrovni kostela svatého Jakuba policajti vytvořili kordon a my jsme zrovna tehdy jako studenti šli touto cestou. V pondělí prostě je to naprosto nejasné, jak se ta státní moc zachovat, ty alternativy byly různé.
Na těch velkých školách, jako je technika a sudo a tak dále, tak zůstalo 20-30% studentů. Bylo hodně na to, aby mohli stávkovat, fungovat.
My jsme věděli, že někdo odjel, takže okamžitě odjeli domů, aby se nám do něčeho míchat.
A pak třeba jsem měla kamarádku, říká mi, pojď s náma, prostě něco se děje, jo. A ona měla myšlenky úplně jinde, protože ještě před týdnem se zamilovala, jo.
To bylo i to, že ty rodiče jim doporučili, aby tam nebyli.
Táta by samozřejmě náhodně říkali, jako budu opatrný, takže 60. byli z toho, že všechno zvrhnout a změnit, ale neříkali, nedělejte.
Já jsem neměla strach. Já jsem byla natolik jakoby přesvědčená o tom, že to je prostě ta nejsprávnější a nejdůležitější věc, jako na které se prostě vůbec ve svém životě můžu podílet, jakože i kdyby to pro mě mělo mít nějaké jako negativní důsledky nebo tak bych je hrdě myslela.
Mladí lidi ví, že to, co dělají správně. A nepřipouští si, že by se tomu pozvrhlo. To nadšení je to největší devize. A to tak fungovalo.
Dáme si.
Jeden čaj s 2 lžičkama medu. Dneska vaříme vegetariáni.
Nebyly mobily, měl akorát telefon vlastně vůdce dole na koleji, takže já jsem akorát telefonovala, že jsem v pořádku a že přijedu za 14 dní nebo za 3 týdny.
Jsme byli jako nadšení všichni a 12hodinová pracovní doba byla naprosto běžná.
Sekretariát stávkového výboru, telefony, prosím. Stávkový výbor.
Jsme pořád vlastně gradovali ty požadavky. Co se hradilo takhle dobře, co jeden den vypadalo jako strašně radikální, tak den 2 poté už byla naprostá samozřejmost.
Já si pamatuju, jak si z nás spolužáci dělali legraci ze mě a z Věry, že jsme na Václavském náměstí křičeli z balkónu. Jsme studentky fakulty žurnalistiky a slibujeme, že budeme psát pravdu.
A nenatáčíte vařit čaj.
A už jdete jako robot, tak jako euforii. Takže už vlastně pominul i ten strach, protože z začátku je strašili, že ty milice do té Prahy a že ty tanky odstřihávali nám tam telefony, elektriku.
Tam prostě lidi nosili peníze a nosili tam jídlo a přišli s hrncem guláše.
Ráno přijeli mlikaři, kteří rozváželi prostě mliko a vyhodili x beden prostě mlika pro stávkující studenty a za chvilku jeli kolem pekaři. Přišli lidé s klíčkama a řekli, tady máte k dispozici moje auto a až ho nebudete potřebovat, tak tady napište si adresu a ozvěte se.
Vítám mezi námi paní Martu Kůstou.
Byla jsem opravdu takový ten pěšák, co někde přenes nějaký něco přepsal, přenes plagáty, namazal chleby, bufetu.
Posluchárna v Pavlově ústavě byla plná prostě psacích strojů, kde seděly holky prostě a dělali tu práci. Někdo seděl u telefonu a prostě furt jako je telefonoval.
Žádný xerox, nic kopírky nebyly, takže všechno z 5 nebo 6 kopií, 6 kopírák na psacím stole.
Na praxi na gymnáziu, které jsem vystudovala, tam jsem vlastně jakoby, dejme tomu, pašovala ty materiály mezi ty středoškolské studenty.
Vyletovali jsme nějaké plagáty tam na čáře, malovali jsme ty plagáty.
Bylo nás tak 5, 6, nevím už přesně, chodili jsme do dolů ostravských nebo v okolí. Je vám 22 let a před váma stojí prostě 300-400 dělníků a teď máte teda říct, proč stávkujete? Oni měli, že v těch prvních dnech informace jenom vlastně z médií, z televize nebo z novin, z Rudého práva a tak. A tam pořád slyšeli, že prostě jsme neonacistické živly a placení západními rozvědkami nebo něco takového.
Fakt nás neměli rádi začátku, prostě za naše prachy si tady prostě vymýšlíte a...
Bez jídla, nebo jen řekněme s chlebem a se salámem se pokračovat dá, ale bez pocitu, že za námi stojí prostí lidé, dělníci, že za námi stojí národ, se pokračovat nedá.
No a pak vlastně nastal ten zlom a to už jsme si byli jistí, že už jako se nám nic nestane, protože prostě už nás bylo hodně. Už prostě ta masa lidí na náměstí, už to nebyli jenom studenti, byli to prostě už normální lidi.
Ještě jsme nezvítězili. Boj pokračuje.
prostě všichni byli tak nějak jako na jedné vlně, že jsme se potkávali jako s lidma, o kterých jsme dřív jenom četli, slýchali, najednou jsme je mohli někde vidět.
V podstatě jsem čul najednou s vámi jednali představitelé města, kraje, státu, zvala si nás ministryně školství, to je nepředstavitelné, že byste někdo hlavně vás naslouchali. Že?
Ve 20 letech jsme se dostali k tomu, že já jsem měla možnost dělat rozhovor s Borisem Jelcinem.
Jménem naší fakulty a všech studentů bych přivítal na dnešním setkáním našeho studentského prezidenta, pana Václava Havla.
Když jsem letěl kolem přes Urbanova náměstí a tam viděl jsem v televizi a vidím, že Havel je zvolený. Říkám si, tak tady to. Do té doby ještě nemělo moc smysl nějak extra jásat. A teď si říkám, tak teď už to bude fajn.
Tohle to byla revoluce. Ať si říká, kdo chce, co chce. Pro mě není revoluce, že je někde krev, mrtví a tak dále. Pro mě je revoluce, že tady se změnil naprosto systém. Od plánovaného hospodářství k tomu tržnímu, svobody jsou tady, je tady parlamentní systém, jsou tady volby.
Jo, teď jsme prostě vyhráli, je svoboda, je demokracie a nazdar, už to jinak nebude. Havel je na hradě, my si děláme, co chceme.
Dobrý večer. Náš speciální kalendář je u cíle. Dnes začaly v Československu svobodné volby.
V Československu po 52 letech obnovená premiéra. Každý může volit, koho chce. Jaký život by měla mít vaše dcera?
Co nejhezčí.
To znamená, aby se mohla vzdělávat, aby mohla cestovat, aby měla peníze a aby zažila vlastně jenom samý příjemné věci.
A co pro to uděláte?
Zvolím tu správnou stranu.
V 90. leta byly prostě neuvěřitelný, že to byla totální euforie, prostě naprostá svoboda.
Naprosto exkluzivní záležitost mýho osobního, respektive pracovního vývoje.
Zcela novou kvalitou služeb teď chtějí všechny rekreanty a hosty Slabské Přehrady překvapit soukromé společnosti. Třeba nově otevřený hotel Sport Živohošť s různými středisky v různých cenových kategoriích se změnil k nepoznání.
Ta doba byla jako strašně euforická a vlastně hezká. Jo. To bylo jako, když se vytáhne nějaký špun a teď jako vyletí ten džin.
Projeli jsme Francii, Španělsko, vlastně na nějakých stipendiích, prostě na zahraničí, na studijních pobytech.
To vyjetí někam není jenom v tom, že tam uvidíte jejich památky, ale že ti lidé, kteří nežili těch 40 let v komunismu, tak prostě byli jiní a inspirativní.
Já jsem najednou mohl jako do toho světa jít a jako přinést si, co si zaslouží.
Mám pocit, jsem třeba přivez jako si nějaký vědomosti o tom, jak se teda jako digitálně zpracovává zvuk. Na základě toho se pak jako po nějaký době na FAMu koupil první počítač jako na zpracování zvuku. A...
Začal jsem na rádiu Bonton, což byl první český rádio a nikdo nás nekontroloval. A respektive nikdo nám nic neříkal, protože nám to nikdo nevěděl, jak se má dělat dobrý rádio.
Ahoj, bravo!
Plné tramvaje, davy lidí a ovšem také otevřené restaurace, které pochopili, že mohou udělat hezkou tržbu.
Potom, když jako přišla taková ta prvotní euforie, většinu Evropy jako už jsem projela, nějak se stabilizovala ta situace na katedře, pak jsem začala tak jako řešit prostě osobní situaci, jako vypadalo to, že bych jako se usadila.
Bylo mi téměř 30, tak jsem říkal, tak co, tak mám 10 let na to. Něco vybudovat.
Oproti klasickým komerčním firmám je investiční banka ve výhodě v tom, že perspektivním klientům se zdravým ekonomickým vývojem a zajištěným odbytem může nabídnout úvěry, případně se na novém projektu kapitálově podílet.
Prostě podnikat, dělat na sebe, jakoby budovat zaměstnanecké pozice a tak dále, prostě jako pustit se do toho a bylo to motivující.
Někteří ty už honem toho využili a třeba přivezli vagón ponožek, protože tady byl hlad po všem, tady cokoliv, co vypadalo barevně a jinak. Jo, tak to jsou ty první zbohatlíci, který měli ty nějaký peníze, že jo? Což už asi svědčí o tom, že to nebyli úplně jako normální lidi.
Dnes oficiálně začal na všech poštách ČSFR prodej kuponových známek, informačních příruček a kuponových knížek.
Česká republika schválila majetek v hodnotě 192 miliard korun. Slovenská republika nabízí téměř 93 miliard a federace 12 miliard.
Kuponové knížky, včetně známek, se staly nikoli ojedinělým dárkem pod vánočním stromečkem.
To, co přišlo jako potom, tak to bylo samozřejmě takový vystřízlivění.
Privatizační kauzy a ekonomické různé záležitosti.
Bylo to absolutně promarněná příležitost tu zemi někam skutečně posunout jako hodně.
Když to srovnám s pokusama vlastně na Balkáně v postsovětském prostoru, nemluvě o zemích arabského jara nebo teď třeba Barmě, tak vlastně jsme měli velký štěstí.
Najednou některý politici se začali pakovat, že jo, někdo začal být trošku podvodným politikem, někdo lhal, jo, a to taky ale v celém světě. Takhle to je mezi všemi politiky na celém světě, to jsem poznal. Navenek oni budou na sebe štíkat ve sněmovně nebo kdekoliv, no. A pak to stejně někam spolu na pivo. Tak začalo to konečně smlouvu.
To jsem měla pocit, že je to jako na vystěhování.
To bylo ještě posledně jako i zvednutí, kdy jsme se tenkrát jako sešli, ani nevím, kdo to moderoval a říkal, no co budeme dělat, že jo? Jsem říkal, no co budeme dělat.
Patriku, co se tam teď děje?
V legendární pražské kavárně Slavia se sešlo několik bývalých studentských vůdců listopadových dní roku 89, aby se psalo výzvu.
My jsme na začátku převratu hovořili o morálce, o mravnosti. My jsme chtěli vládu slušných lidí.
Uvědoměním, že to není tak jednoduché naplnění těch ideálů sametové revoluce, končí buď opoziční smlouvou, anebo prostě nějak jako se začátkem nového milénia.
Že se změní systém, ještě nic neznamená. Musí se změnit ty lidi a to je dlouhá cesta.
To, co jako dělá tenhle projekt vlastně jako zajímavým, že ta skupina není jednotná vůbec. Jo, že stejně jako byly různorodí prostě před tou revolucí, tak zase se ty cesty potom jako rozešly. Někteří se zůstali v politice a jiní naopak prostě zase prostě tu svobodu naplňovali jinde.
Někdy právě v roce 1997 jsme si říkali, že chceme dělat počítačové hry.
Založili jsme novou společnost Soundware.
Ještě mám rád víno, tak jsem si otevřel tady vinárničku.
Jsem byla v novinách, přišly děti a z toho vyplynula jedna knížka, druhá vlastně publikace.
Stál jsem u vzniku křesťansko-demokratické strany, jsem byl i v zastupitelstvu té obce. Dělal jsem třeba docela dost koncertů Karla Gota.
Kromě toho, že jsem fyzioterapeut, tak už se dá říct, že jsem i praktik tradiční čínské medicíny.
Já jsem dostal tu profesoru v Cardiffu.
Jsme vlastně začali uvažovat o tom, že založíme nějaké studium, kde bychom vychovávali studenty, kteří by začali nějak pečovat vlastně o ten region.
Já si výběrové řízení na podředitele Českého centra fixné hry.
Já jsem stále na gymnáziu.
Nastává rok 2011, odchází Jiří Dinsbír, odchází Ivan Martin Jirous, Zvaný Magor a v prosinci 2011 odchází Václav Havel. A tam vlastně pro opravdu jako část našich narátorů vlastně najednou končí ta éra, kdy už jako kdy se ještě dokázali orientovat ve světě. A teď jsme zase na těch dvou jako úrovních. Většina je nespokojená s politickou situací nebo se společenskou situací, jak už to nazveme, ale zároveň osobně spokojená.
Členové umělecké skupiny Stohoven se v převlečení za kominíky dostali až k standardě a nestandardně ji na několik hodin vyměnili.
Víš, co by řekl? No tak je to trochu taková klukovina, jako, ale tak myslím, že podstatné je, že nebylo vlhko, takže nesklouzli jsme střechy, což by jistě bylo asi nezamýšlené a byla by to škoda, protože možná i třeba dělají jiné ještě věci než ty trenírky. Já jsem kluky pozval na takový happening, bude tam taky Mike Jagger a Mia Farrow a možná i Woody Allen, ale ten to ještě nepotvrdil. To byla dobrá.
strašné věci se mění, je to smysl života, že nemůžeme žít v jiném prostoru. Ale neměli bychom nikdy zapomenout na to, že ten vývoj musíme také hodnotit.
V tom 89. když jsme šli jako do nějakých demonstrací nebo do něčeho, tak my jsme tam vlastně předkládali nějaké konkrétní požadavky. My jsme měli představu, co chceme. Ale vlastně myslím si, že opravdu ta doba je tak jiná, že vlastně to uspořádání jako je potřeba postavit na něčem úplně jiném.
Ten etos, to znamená, nelžeme, jde nám o hodnoty, jde nám o něco víc než jenom prostá existence, tak bylo něco, z čeho Česká republika poměrně dlouhou dobu si myslím čerpala. Teď bych řekl, že se vyčerpal a nic nového ho nenahradilo.
Nevíme, co stane v Evropě, nevíme, co stane ve světě, ale já jsem proto nejdřív jako si dáme v vlastně Prahy.
Vždycky jsem zastával, že člověk má mít volnost, má mít odpovědnost za svůj život a má ho svých rukou. A myslím si, že tato doba to dává.
Jestliže se člověk chce angažovat ve věcech veřejných, tak musí vstoupit do politiky. Já už to tak vidím. A pokud nechce...
Existuje spoustu nástrojů, jak se na společenském dění podílet. Počínaje volbami a končí různými občanskými spolky. U nás na Masarykové univerzitě funguje skupina studentů, která odhaluje jako demagogie a lži v politických projevech.
Náš stát byl obnoven. Úkol je vybudovat republiku demokratickou.
Najednou oni jsou ve věku, ve kterém prostě byli rezidenti v tom roce 89. Vlastně řeší tu otázku, neměli bychom teda teď my vlastně jako převzít další kus zodpovědnosti a něco jako dělat pro to, co považujeme my za dobré ve chvíli, kdy máme pocit, že ta současná společenská situace jako není dobrá. Nebo jako máme prostě to předat už někomu, kdo ani nezažil tu revoluci a je vlastně jakoby neskažený tím socialismem.
Hodně se to stýká téhleté otázce v tom, že řeknou, ale už je to na nich. Já bych chtěl, aby si to ty moje děti uvědomili, že už teďko drží ten život ve svých rukou.
Akci s podtitulem Díky, že můžeme organizují studenti vysokých škol. Na národní třídě chtěli vytvořit prostor pro diskuzi a přilákat všechny věkové kategorie.
Ta generace je jiná. Oni nezažívali ty problémy, které jsme zažívali my, takže oni tím byli konfrontováni tím, že nemůžou říct svůj názor.
Pro ně už je ten listopad jako zrušení nevolnictví, jo, nebo prostě jako, to je opravdu dávná historie, protože to jako doba, že bez mobilních telefonů, jako s těma programy v televizi.
Dcera říkala si před rokem, že je nám závidí, že my jsme to měli dobrý. A to jsem si poprvé uvědomila, že vlastně možná má trošku pravdu, že my jsme jakoby nezažili už ty fakty minuse, jako těch 50. letech. A že jsme jako měli toho jasného nepřítele a mohli jsme si užít tu revoluci.
Když si člověk vezme, že od antiky je mládež zkažená a furt není zkáza světa, tak jako proto já si i bráním tomu, jak se říká, že jsou hloupí.
Nabývají ty zkušenosti venku, že vidějí to v tom širším úhlu. Když potřebují, tak oni dokáží opravdu velice rychle, být velice kreativní. Já jsem v té době byl taky takový, ale oni jsou přece jenom díky těm moderním technologiím, oni jsou ještě takový svížnější.
My jsme zažili jako ten úžasný přechod z té nesvobody do svobody, ale oni jako vlastně necítí jako zásadní problém svoboda, nesvoboda, oni cítí jako zásadní problém životní prostředí a co bude dál s planetou, tak jako jo, to chápu. V tomto teda jim fandím úplně.
So, thank you for attention. I apologize to mute them all because of broadcasting. So now please unmute yourself. And you saw that there were two speakers from our institute, Professor Miroslav Vaněk, the director, and also Jana. So this film was complementary to the initial paper. And I would like to use the chance that Jana is still here. If you have any question or comment on the paper or on the document, so now there is a chance, 5 minutes for some discussion or some comments, if you can. Nobody? So,
perhaps if I can, just a short question. There were some hints that we've seen in the documentary and that we heard from Jana before, but it would be great if you could perhaps expand a little bit more on the view that there is in Europe of Europe today in the Czech Republic and in Slovakia, perhaps through your interviews and through the interviews of your project, if you could expand a little bit on this.
Okay, thank you for the question. I hope I got it right. The question about relationship towards Europe and towards like maybe European Union or?
Yes, sorry, that was the question.
Yeah, thank you. I just didn't want to spend 5 minutes answering a completely different question. Yeah, I think the relationship towards Europe is very much, again, influenced by Havel, who was very a pro-EU politician, and he was actually the one who spoke the most about the place of the Czech Republic inside Europe and how we should not isolate ourselves from Europe, and how we should be like a member of the European Union. And I think that these narrators who were part of the Velvet Revolution were one of the main slogans of the Velvet Revolution was like back to Europe. You know, let's get back to Europe. Let's not isolate ourselves from Western Europe or Europe as such. Pretty much influenced these people's opinions on inclinations in this sense. So I'd say I didn't want to talk too much about their political views, but I think that from this documentary or maybe even my speech, it was pretty much obvious that they are more pro-EU, more pro-democratic parties, and they try to explain why populist or authoritarian tendencies are dangerous in this sense, and also how it could be dangerous for in terms of like our place in Europe. So I'd say in this question and in many questions actually, this group of narrators is pretty much would probably agree with each other. They're pretty much homogeneous.
So thank you. Any question more?
Yeah, I had something. Thank you. With respect to the issue of revolution you spoke about in your opening speech, and which was also mentioned, if I'm not making a mistake, by the director of the institute in the documentary, he said something like, no matter what they thought, I do think that it was a revolution because a revolution is something which happens when things change. So with respect to the retrospective approach and the retrospective perception of the 1989 among your interviewed, is there any difference with respect to this perception of revolution? Is the very meaning of revolution changed? Has the very meaning of revolution changed over time? And if you can maybe get back to the differences about this issue of revolution among the three groups you mentioned during your speech. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for your question. I think that the relationship towards revolution, or if it was actually a revolution, or is it something else? And when you start opening the question, was it something else? That kind of means that your approach is a bit different. You know, it's not like, yeah, it was a revolution. Now let's just talk about how great it was, for example. I think in the first two groups, the relationship towards this question, was it a revolution, was pretty much, was pretty much simple, because for these people, it was a revolution. They wouldn't like to open some questions that could, lower the meaning of the event. pretty much. So, I mean, we could find somebody who would, say, well, maybe we should be more critical towards it. But the meaning for them was that it was that crucial and it was such a great change that they wouldn't have problems with calling it a revolution. But for the third group, for those skeptics or for those who see it like it's something prepared or their role in it was like a coincidence and didn't mean pretty much anything else. There was this question, and these people would be pretty much more likely to even not call it a revolution. They would say, was it a revolution? Was it not? Was it just a handing over the power? And these people would have the most tendencies to even question the meaning of the event. But again, as I said, it's the smallest group. I don't think if I can recall exactly, but these were like individuals, maybe not under 10 people of these groups of students who were active in 1989, who would be this maybe open to critiques from different spectrums.
Thank you.
So, I think, are there any comments more? Nothing. So I ask Roberto, you can continue with in the second section on the case study presentation, if there are any. Yeah. May I ask you?
Yeah, I share the screen again. Okay, can you see the presentation?
Yeah, we see it.
So in this 5 minutes, I will try to very quickly discuss with you one of the case studies of our interviews, the one made with Massimo D'Alema, who in some cases is the champion of that top-down approach I discussed at the beginning of my presentation, and that we try to rebalance by including other people more involved at the local level and coming from different spectrum of the political Italian landscape. Maybe at the beginning of my presentation, I went too fast in showing you the list of the interviewed, but we also included people from the Catholic Church, people from the, let's say, conservative side of the Italian political landscape and the Bologna's political landscape. So, however, I tried, I chose Massimo D'Alema, who was the former national secretary of the Democratic Party of the Left between 1994 and 1999, so the evolution of the former Italian Communist Party. He was prime minister in 1998-2000, and then he became a minister of the foreign affairs in 2006-2008 under the second Prodi's government. Why did I choose D'Alema as far as the goals of our project are concerned? Because I do think that he tells us two interesting things with respect to 1989 and the long-term effects of 1989 and the collapse of the Soviet system on Europe and not only on Italy. First aspect is the legacy of communism. When at the end of my first presentation, I talked about the issue of elusive memories, loose memories with respect to the relationship between people who belong to the, let's say, communist world and the memory of the Berlin Wall, I exactly referred to this contradiction because during in D'Alema's interviews, he endlessly underscored his personal distance, the absence of any, let's say, intimacy, political intimacy with the Soviet system, the Berlin Wall, and so on and so forth. But things change when the Berlin Wall fell down. And at that point, he reflected on the link between the fall of the Berlin Wall and the developments that Italian communism experienced after 1989-1991. And I quote from his interview. D'Alema says, Our problem was not being or not supportive to the USSR or the Berlin Wall. The issue was that with the fall of the Berlin Wall, the very project of the democratic reform of communism, that is the project of the Italian communists themselves, fell down and was torn apart. So the collapse of the socialist system marks to what extent the historical project of the Italian communists, that is to say the democratic self-reform of communism, was exhausted. And this was the very reason why the Italian Communist Party changed its name in 1991. So I do think that this reflection marks a sort of contradictory relationship between the memory of the Berlin Wall and the fall of the Berlin Wall and the impact that this event had on the specific case of Italian communism. Because if on the one side, the Berlin Wall was perceived as something marginal, an obsolete byproduct of the Cold War game, then it becomes important and significant only when it disappears. And I do think that this fact that the Berlin Wall gains momentum, in a sense, only with its disappearance, it's something that we should still reflect on during our research. The second point, I go fast, is about the long-term effects of 1989 and the fall of the Berlin Wall on Europe. Here I refer to Europe and as the, let's say, institutional framework of European Union, even though, as we know, Europe does not exactly coincide with the let's say, institutional borders of European Union. Because in a quite provocative way, the lemma reflected on the process of enlargement that took place in the mid-2000s, when the EU, when many countries, especially Eastern countries, joined the EU, and the EU, started to, the EU included 27 countries. At that point, the lemma reflected on the approach that Eastern countries had on the process of joining of the EU. And he said in a quite provocative way that one of the reasons of the ill management of the relationship between Eastern countries and Brussels, let's say, was the fact that Eastern countries, in his opinion, believed to join the EU as it was a sort of Western, generic Western alliance, US-led alliance, defense and military institution, more than a proper European supranational institution with different values and different political objectives. And keep in mind that when we addressed the same question to Romano Prodi, former president of the EU Commission in 1999-2004, of course, he responded in a quite opposite way. And this is not surprisingly, of course, because he contributed to prepare and to set up that enlargement process. But I do think that when we reflect on the long-term processes and long-term impacts that 1989 and the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet system had on Eastern countries, and the mutual relationship between Eastern countries and, let's say, Brussels and the European Union as a whole, we can look at this sort of perception, this sort of interpretation of the way in which Eastern countries approached their entrance in the EU, even though, of course, as I said, the lemma maintained this sentence in a quite provocative way. I do think that this is an interesting clue in order to deepen and to further analyze how the mutual perception of East and West, let's say, if you will, combined and merged together in the setting up of the European integration process, especially during the 2000 and later on. Thank you for your attention, and I stop here and I leave the floor to Teresa Malic, I guess. Sorry, yes, just a second. I stopped sharing. Here we go.
Thank you very much, Roberto. Again, I decided to deepen the figure of Gizella Callenbach. Can you see everything?
Yes.
You should. Gizella Callenbach, because I think she raised interesting points for our historiographical discussion, but also for contemporary issues happening right now in the European Union and in the European territory. There is a first aspect. I will be short and, you know, just provide quick and easy inputs, but just to reflect a little bit together. The first aspect I have identified is the one of the church, of the Christian church. This comes out in all the 3 interviews that I have conducted in Leipzig. Actually, all 3 interviewees report how the environment that they had in their families, the open discussion that they experienced there, and the influence of the church in the families and outside the family too, as a space of free expression, was fundamental in the development of their personalities first, and of their political, openly intended political positions in favor of civil rights afterwards. This often brought families to oppose GDR mass organizations and societal groups, as it is the case with Callenbach. I mentioned it shortly before, who was not sent to the Freie Deutsche Jugend, the Free German Youth. And this is connected very closely to the form that dissidents assumed for the interviewees. And in the case of Gizella Callenbach, she has identified retrospectively 2 elements in her road to dissidence. On the one hand, the dissatisfaction for the educational system of the GDR, and on the other hand, the environment. As for education, she was not able to go to school because of her origin and her family's ties to the church, and she suffered from it. She did not want the same for her children. This is how she has explained the issue and reinforced her concept of militance afterwards. The environmental awareness, she explained, came while she was studying chemical engineering and dealing with industries and realizing the impact that chemicals had on the planet. She sticks coherently to these 2 aspects, and the environment in particular has become a key topic in her narration of herself and her political experience, as it defined her participation to the civil rights movement, but also her profession afterwards and her contribution within the European Parliament for the Greens, as I said before, in the early 2000s. Other important aspects which Callenbach highlights the fact that not for all, but for her and for many other components of the Leipzig civil rights group, the aim of peaceful revolution was not reunification with West Germany. That came afterwards. They wanted in the first place the reform of the GDR, the place that they considered their birthplace and their motherland. The way the GDR was in a way absorbed, we could say, by West Germany after 1990, especially on the economic side. This has been a very highly debated aspect also in historiography, generated disillusionment to a certain extent from their sides. It was a change of frames and of reference points. About Europe after 1989, I asked her generally what did she think about the integration process of the European Union after, sorry, I'm talking again about the European Union, after the fall of the wall. And the first answer of Callenbach was that for the GDR, the entrance in the European Union was automatic, but for many countries it was not in Central Eastern Europe, and they had to work hard for reforms for 14 years before they could enter. The Eastern Central European countries were considered, she says in the interview, another category compared with the GDR. She thinks that things changed for real on a European level only after 2004, but that in many ways integration is not yet concluded. And she links this to the feeling of what she has called Zweitranglichkeit, second-rateness, secondariness. That she thinks is present in the countries of Central Eastern Europe even today, and also in East Germans. She says, and here's a quote in German that I will translate, sensations, feelings, and perceptions are not without influence in everyday life. And again, she said, there are many people that have the feeling that they are Germans of the second class. So this is something that came up in the interview. Last, talking about walls, she does not see any big differences between the Berlin Wall and other contemporary walls in their conception. She's quite direct in the interview on this, and she links this to the worrying rise of the extreme right, xenophobic and racist discourse all over Europe and the world. And she says, and with this I conclude, walls always divide. Mauern trennen immer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Teresa. It was very, very inspiring and nice case study interview. And is Lorena present? Can you hear me? Or the next one, Mateusz or Lorena, one of them should present something.
Oh, I
Hello?
can.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
I'm switching on my presentation. Okay.
Yeah, we
do you
see
my presentation?
Yeah, presentation.
Okay.
It's nice.
So, hello again. To analyze the main aspects of our experience of making interviews, I decided to present you some excerpts, analysis of our interview with Anna Beattaborjevich, a photographer born in 1958, who were active in the exact precise moment in 1989. The interview was very fruitful for us because she, as a photographer, used her visual imagination, visual perception of that event, because she remembered history by frames, by her photos. So describing her famous in Poland photos, we were recalling her memories. As you see, I would like to start from maybe our part of transformation of 1989 and one crucial aspect of Polish remembering of this year. She is precisely saying, but we did destroy this wall, because among Polish citizens there is some strong belief that we did start the transformation of 80s with in August 1980 with Solidarność, and we perceive the fall of Berlin Wall in November 1981 by perspective of semi-free country after the roundtable talks and semi-free elections in June 98. So first very important concern issue is the role of Poles in the whole process, and the meaning of the fall of Berlin Wall. Is it really crucial, or is it only the final, the symbol of the whole process? And of course, I show you her photo. Also, another aspect of our interview, very important, is are accidents in Poland in November 1989, because we also were changing our reality by destroying monuments of former communist heroes, and with Anna Beattaborjevich, we analyzed her views, opinions about transformation after semi-free elections of 1999, and her. And secondly, second main aspect of our interview was some idea that the process of falling walls is unfinished. Yes, and it was very obvious for our Polish narrators, Polish interviewees, that current situation in Belarus, the street riots, the protests, is next phase of transformation of 90s, of accidents in Poland, East Germany, Hungary, and etc. And we still wait for next countries to be free. And for her, it is very important to share her experience, to share experience of her generation, to build up a new society, to build, to create a revolution in peaceful way. So some reflection about Belarusian situation is very important for her. Thank you.
Thank you. Mateusz, yeah, thank you. And now, is there prepared anybody from municipality of Tirana? So I cannot. So I don't
Can
know.
you hear me?
Yeah, now I hear you.
Okay. Now I'll try to show something. I've heard even those who spoke before. I would just point out an interview with Mr. Lubonia. Again, I don't have something to show, but I will just tell the story. So Lubonia is someone who was imprisoned in the middle of the 70s. And he went out of prison in 1993. And why I think is impressive his interview is because let's say nowadays he is a socially and environmentally engaged individual, and he says that he is a leftist. So not too many political prisoners who in those days say nowadays that they are leftists. All of them, they say that they are rightists, or that they are let's say democratic or with Democratic Party in Albania, against the totalitarian regime, against the Socialist Party, and everything else. But he points out that the regime wasn't leftist, wasn't communist. It was a totalitarian regime, and even a criminal one. So I think it's impressive because I think it's a reflection and will make everyone who reads his interview to think something, to think that maybe we have to see in another way what happened between 1945 and 1990s. Maybe I don't know. For me, I find it very, very important, this one, from the historical point of view. And I don't know what I can point out else from this story, but it doesn't happen in Albania every day that someone says that he is still leftist, and maybe even at the edge of the left when he was imprisoned by the previous regime.
Okay. Is there anything else you will present us, or?
No, because I told you even before I didn't have a program and I didn't know what, but listening to the colleagues, I just had to tell this thing about Livonia because it's very interesting for us in Albania, let's say.
Yeah, of course. So I didn't want to interrupt you. So, if I may, I will conclude this second section, and I will present now without PowerPoint presentation. I will present some moments, some ideas from the interview with one of the narrators, a 55-year-old woman. This interview, according to my opinion, very well reflects on the issue of freedom it's gaining after 1989 and the impact of significant events of the so-called great history on the individual's freedom. This woman was born in June 1965 in northern Bohemia. Soon after, however, the family moved to Prague, and so she lived all her life in Prague. Her father worked at the Ministry of the Interior. In 1968, he had to leave the office as he disagreed with the invasion of Warsaw Pact troops to Czechoslovakia. After this, his father worked until his retirement in a lower position at a research institute. The narrator, this woman, did not tell almost anything about her mother. The father is the central figure in the story, although in conformity with a gender hierarchy in the society. Her father decided on narrator's profession. He chose the secondary school of economics as the best way for a girl. However, she didn't like it at all. She hated accounting, economics. She started to work, but she graduated from the secondary school and started to work in a monopoly agency representing Czechoslovak artists abroad. And she worked in this agency until 1990. It was boring office work, but in relative peace with a good colleagues around. Through friends, she gradually gained an awareness of dissent, but she was not involved intensively. The narrator experienced the fall of the Berlin Wall directly in Berlin, because by coincidence, she was there on a tourist tour at the time of the fall. The fall's memory is very vivid, emotionally in her rememberings. It's such a milestone of her life, engraved in her memory very, very deeply. However, she did not spend the period just after 1989 very actively, nor did she take advantage of new professional opportunities as she soon became pregnant. She was on maternity leave until 1997. In fact, the whole key post-revolutionary period, this exciting period, as you saw it also in the document. After maternity, she returned to the profession of an accountant, still to the same boring profession. She explains this by a lack of ambition, the fact that she never wanted to be a leader, even though she was nominated. She said, "I'm not the right boss type." Besides, her first husband began to conduct his own business, his own entrepreneurship, and she felt the need to have at least one stable income in the family, which she took as her duty. Even in the time of freedom and democracy, and it is interesting for me, She encounters various obstacles of gender socialization, a specific life curriculum when she missed opportunities because she spent her life at home with children and then at an unsatisfactory job to sustain the family. In 2018, however, she completed a master's degree in contemporary history, oral history. It's one of our former students. Completed study is, in fact, at odds with her statement about laziness and keeping one's comfort. Finally, the self-criticism, according to my interpretation, serves as a rationalization of her previous decisions, which were not her own, at least not completely. And this shows that democracy and political freedom do not automatically mean removing all barriers and obstacles and all non-freedom within society. She is strongly pro-European oriented. She reflects the issues globally. She is interested in what is happening in the United States of America, implicitly very critical to Donald Trump. This interest also relates to that her second husband is an American living in Prague. She married for the second time in 2010. In principle, she admits that freedom is great, welcome, but that it is difficult to make decisions independently, freely, and take responsibility for one's decision. At the end of the interview, she re-emphasized the freedom, especially the freedom of movement, of free access to information. Today, however, she also observes a kind of information overabundance, which can also be dangerous. She is reflexive. She perceives as a problem how the planet is changing, how ecological problems are growing. She stresses water shortage, global warming, the fact that, to quote her, in fact, the biggest pest is a man here. For me, to conclude this short presentation, it would be very interesting to follow if her opinions and fundamental values had changed after and during and after a pandemic crisis, because this interview was recorded a month before it started the crisis in the Czech Republic. So thank you for attention with this short presentation of one of our interviews. And I think after the second section, there is some time or chance for comments, for questions. If you have anything comment to the presentations, to interviews, to methodology, please, now is the time, I think.
I would say that in my opinion, it is very fascinating that we have adopted so diverse approaches to our task, to the project. And it is fantastic because we not only convey the view on fall of Berlin Wall of scrutinized citizens in relations of our narrators, but also we convey the meaning, the view in a way which we adopted to take part in this project. Because in my opinion, we adopted very various methodologies, and it is a great thing.
Is there Gramsci Foundation hearing that? I think it's a message for you at first.
Yes, we heard and we are very, very happy hearing this report from Mateusz, because our aim was just this one, to convey different points of view and different stories, different memories, and also to point a light on this diversity. And and to show to all of us how important is this diversity to create a dialogue among us. So this was one of our objectives, our goals in this project. And thanks to what Mateusz says, maybe we are reaching also this goal.
Thank you. You announced that someone from the University of Bielefeld will connect for comments, or is it true?
No, unfortunately, I heard from Vito Gironda, but Frank Gruner had to connect with us this evening, but he had some problems. So it's a pity, but we don't have anybody from Bielefeld this time.
Yeah. So I think.
May I just?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. May I just add a reflection, which is in many respects self-evident, by comparing and the experiences of interviews held in Eastern countries, and for example here in Italy, it is quite blatant the diversity of perceptions, of course, of that events, 1989, the revolution, democratic revolutions, and the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I, for example, by following you, Lenka, and your case study, who focused on the issue of freedom, for example, it is something that in my interviews, for example, I've never heard about. And I do think that these divergences and also the stress on feelings such as disappointment, disillusionment, that are somehow linked to the long-term effects of 1989 and the collapse of the Soviet system within our Italian interviews is quite telling about the different perception and different views that, of course, characterized different national and cultural experiences. Beyond, of course, the personal biographies, beyond the personal commitments in the personal direct or indirect commitments in the events that characterized 1989. So I do think that it is quite fruitful to combine and compare these quite diverging, as Mateusz rightly stressed, approaches and outcomes, if you will, of our interviews.
Yeah.
Just a comment.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I think Bruna Lopiundo is with us. There is a time for some pictures, projecting pictures.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm here. Thank you, Lenka. I will share my presentation. Just a moment.
I'm looking forward to your photos the whole afternoon.
Okay, thank you. I'm what a pressure. Share. Can you see my presentation?
Yeah, we see it.
And can you see me and hear me?
Yeah, everything.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Lenka. And I would also like to thank Pierre Alozi, who is participating in our event, to our events today. So please, Pierre, feel free to interrupt me if you want to comment or explain your own work. European Flux is an exhibition, but also a book by the photographer Pierre Aloisi. The exhibition was launched in London last year, last November, at the Europe House in London on the occasion of the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Last June, Partner Past interviewed Pierre Aloisi, and you can find the video of on the website of the project. At the moment, we only have a French version, but we would like to add some English subtitles for some important extracts. So prior to commenting on the photos of Pierre, on the photos that Pierre has shared with us, and that he's generously allowed us to use them for the purpose of our project, I would like to briefly talk about Pierre's journey and the reasons why he decided to move to West Berlin in the 80s, in the late 80s. Pierre is a French-Nigerian or Afro-European, as he said in the interview, photographer. And in the 80s, it is his first experiences, and he mainly works for some independent theater companies. He soon developed an interest for popular movements and political marches because he thinks that street demonstrations are expressive movements that recalls theater. Pierre is first fascinated by Berlin since he first watched the movie The Wings of Desire by Wim Wenders. That is a film in black and white, and we will see that Pierre mainly works in black and white, and this film makes him realize that Berlin is like no other city. And during the interview, Pierre says that explain that in Berlin you can see contemporary history everywhere, while in cities like Paris or London the history belongs to the past. So he therefore decides to move to Berlin to experience contemporary history. And once there, he starts working as a photo reporter for some newspaper such as the Die Tageszeitung, the Spiegel, and the Tagesspiegel. The day of the Berlin Wall fall, he was working at Kreuzberg with the theater company Antonin Artaud, and many rumors about a possible fall of the wall started spreading during the day. Crowds of people started going towards, as he said during the interview, so crowds of people started going towards the wall, and Pierre decided to take his bike and run up and down along the wall to take photos of the tons of people who were approaching the wall and sitting on it. In that moment, he didn't realize he was taking photos of a very important historical moment, but as he said, he was just using this his camera without any specific project in mind. That's how Pierre starts work on the fall of the Berlin Wall. This project, this day, crucial day, made him travel then around Eastern Europe between 1989 and 1992 to narrate the disintegration of the communist system. He started with some daily trips to East Berlin and surroundings to take photos of that urban landscapes that was so different from the West. And the landscape in his photos is, as he said, monochrome, and there is a heavy atmosphere, vast fields, and agricultural machinery from the 50s. Idan hears about the Velvet Revolution in Prague and decided to start a journey that will bring him to various countries in the following years. Countries like Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Serbia, Bosnia, Kosovo, Romania, and Bulgaria. We especially interviewed Pierre about his recent work, so Europe in Flux, and he told us that the exhibition project was inspired by the Brexit referendum. He's afraid today that of a possible domino effect on the other countries, and decided to show what are the risks of a union in crisis. So Pierre starts questioning Europe's role in 2012 when the European Union started exerting economic pressure on Greece. During the exhibition launch, the members of the audience are surprised because they were expecting the usual enthusiasm that we normally see about the fall of the Berlin Wall, but Pierre decided side of this event, such as the consequences of the disintegration. As you can see in the sequence of the images that Pierre has chosen for us, we can see a trajectory that goes from the young, the child, the enthusiasm, hope of the little girl on the wall, to the consequences of the civil wars that followed in Eastern Europe. So, as he said during the interview, it doesn't want to give pessimistic message about the future, but rather warning young European generations. Basically, the aim of the project Europe in Flux is to allow young generations to know the past in order to better understand the present. But it also invites to implement changes. They need to take action. Young people need to take action to change our capitalistic system that is no longer working, according to Pierre. But in order to do so, they need to learn from the past and the mistakes we made. For this reason, and to thank Pierre, he didn't hesitate to offer us his photos for our project, because he thinks we are going with our project in the same direction. We both, Pierre and us, in Unbridging the Walls, we both ask questions about the consequences of these major 20th century events and its impact impact on European citizens today. In the future, we would like to invite Pierre to talk to the young students involved in our project in Paris, because we think that the point of view of a young artist who witnessed these events could really enrich the debates we'll conduct during our workshops. We hope that coronavirus emergency will allow us to do it. So finger crossed, and thank you for your attention. And maybe Pierre, if you want to add something, we are listening. Yeah.
Hello, this is Pierre here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Bruno, can you end sharing?
Okay. I'll stop the share. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
I just a very quick word that I just kind of almost invited myself to this meeting, and of course it's not really my kind of space, because I'm not. This is very academic, and rightfully so. Just wanted to make a comment about the video that you made called "Youth to Youth," which was a very emotional experience for me to watch, not only because of how it's presented the individuals, but also how it presented the solidarity, the euphoria of the time. And that was, of course, for me, a very special time of my life, and not only my life, but also many, many, many other people. And I think also because I was there to experience it. Strangely enough, Prague, being in Prague at that time was incredible. But then, of course, it provided a contrast to what was coming and what I would later photograph further down in my travels through Eastern Europe. Just quickly, the book Europe in Flux, which is produced by a small but very intense publishing house based in Nairobi, Kenya, tries to articulate the events and the consequences of the fall of the Berlin Wall. I mean, there is, as one of your colleagues rightly said from Poland, that the Solidarność movement started well before the fall of the Berlin Wall, and that was perhaps one of the places where things actually started to kick up. But unfortunately, I was not there. But I wish I was, though. But that whole series of events, particularly after the fall of the Berlin Wall, in Romania, in Georgia, in all the different Eastern European countries, was actually, in a sense, for me, kind of, particularly after the Brexit referendum, because I now live in London, and I have been following the Brexit story now since before the referendum, and how that is shaping people's minds, and how it is also through that shaping policy makes me actually extremely worried about the outcomes of these situations which are upon us. And I think that this book is trying to kind of give a warning, so to speak. It's not because it's dark or anything, but it's just a warning in the sense of that, well, this is what happened to us 30 years ago in Europe. I mean, the Bosnian Civil War was devastating, and it was only 6 hours away by train from Munich. And that if we're not careful, then of course we might find ourselves again in another situation similar to what happened after the Soviet Union broke up. So I think it is important that we share and we are conscious of the history that we carry, and I think what your project is trying to do is to keep this contemporary history alive, and to share it with the young generation which is coming, who are now here. And I think that is really important to do. And I really encourage you to kind of continue the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, and I think it was really a pleasure for us to meet the author. It was not included in the program, and I think it's a nice time to spend and see you and share your ideas. So we are approaching end of this webinar, as I see in the program. And so I would like to ask Professor Paolo Capuzzo with his final remarks. Is it possible?
Thank you. Do you hear me, Lenka, and
yeah,
all the others?
Hear
yes.
You.
Good afternoon.
Yeah. And
everybody.
We see you. Yeah, everybody see you.
So thank you for the invitation. Thank you to the Institute of Contemporary History in Prague. It's a pity that we are forced to dialogue so this distance, and we don't have the opportunity to be there in your wonderful city, but we all hope that it will change. Well, it's not so easy to make some final remarks, although I hope it will not be the final, because I have at least a couple of questions to ask to the participants and what I heard. Because there were a lot of inspiring points, ideas, and also this way to use both visual and oral witness, and they open up actually many possibilities to reflect on our recent history, European history, as well as on memory of those events. History and memory, they are of course linked, although they are not the same thing. I would just stress at the beginning some general impressions. Then I will try to frame what we heard today within the issue of the memory of communism and the memory of the end of communism. And then I will go back to some specific for participants. First of all, I think that you made very different choices in the samples people you interviewed, and I think that this is definitely a richness. Although I was struck by the absence of a category of people, or maybe Teresa had the opportunity to interview some people who still have some relationship with the communist past, and at least they reflect on it, and they represent a sort of critical legacy of that experience. But though you have very different people interview, prisoners, students, top politicians and militants, activists, professor, intellectuals, and so on, we don't have the people who actually have a sort of nostalgic feeling with the communist past. It would be interesting to to know how they experienced that moment, 89, different countries. But anyway, you have many different kind of people, and that means different subjectivities involved in those events, and also people who actually weren't born and have then just they participated to the cultural memory transmitted within their society. Another topic which was actually raised by many of you, and I think I don't know exactly at what stage of the project you are. So if this is more or less the final phase, or if you still have the opportunity to develop something, because in different countries, interviewers and interviewed actually mention the relationship between that experience, 89, and Europe, history of Europe, and this is quite obvious, of course, but they make the distinction between Europe and the European Union. And so I think this could be something on which to reflect. European Union intending a bureaucratic, technical, economic apparatus, and Europe as something more rooted in history, culture, social relationships, and so on. Of course, there are connections between these two conceptual entities, but in the experience and what this interviewer said, it doesn't seem they can identify European Union with Europe. And then pandemic. Lenka stressed this point, and I think she is completely right. As it is usual, traumatic experience change memory in a very short time, and I think that you also have the opportunity to reflect on this, because you started your work before the pandemic, and then you were forced to try to carry on it during the pandemic, and I think you can and you should think about it. Yes, as I told you, I would like to just try to frame your work within the broader framework of the memory of communism, the memory of the end of communism. And we saw then with the book of Pierre and with the report of Esther, the importance of images, and particularly of Berlin. Berlin landscape is a landscape on which you can really see the history of Europe and the tragic history of Europe in press on this urban landscape. So, as you know, after '89, there was a huge debate in Berlin on the monuments, what to do with monuments. But this debate started before '89. It started in the '80s, as they started to debate on Nazi monument, which were still there, and how to deal with them, how to bring again into history this memory, how to discuss it, how to use them, and to present to the public these relics of the Nazi time in Berlin and the whole Europe, of course. This is an important point, because, of course, with memory, you can use memory and you can use history as a weapon, actually. You can use it both against someone else. You can use it to identify the enemy and to fight against the enemy. And at the same time, you can also use the history in order to exit, to resolve some conflict you have in the present, and to give a meaning of the deaths and destructions which history brought about. So in the 80s, there was a huge investment actually in Western Europe, also in other parts of the world, particularly Israel and the US, on the memory of Holocaust. And the debate in Berlin was part of this broader, global, I would say, attention to the legacy of the Second World War and to the memory of Holocaust and so on. I think that this debate in the 80s created a sort of frame on how to deal with the tragedies of the 20th century. And after 89, the debate on the memory of communism and how to deal with the monuments and how to deal with the experience of communism, how to deal with victims and history of sufferings in those regimes. Actually, I think that the debate of the 80s was influential also for how the debate developed after 89. And I think it also acted at global level. I would just mention all debates at the global level on the legacy of colonialism, which actually started in the 80s. And again, it was a way through which to confront with this hidden and dark page of European history. And the same we could also say of what happened in South Africa, in Latin America after dictatorship, and all the debates on transitional justice and how then to deal with history and memory within these processes of political change, which were quite radical in some parts of the world. So traumatic experience were at the center of this debate after 89 on a global scale. And I think that there were then, in the case of post-89, Eastern Europe, Soviet Union, and so on, different actually attitude toward that past. On one side, we have a focus on violence, on tyranny, and so the attempt to rewrite the history of the socialist dictatorship and try to reconstruct also tragic histories of crimes of mass execution, tortures, illegality. And this actually, in the Soviet Union particularly, then concerned also, of course, the 1920s and 30s, the first phase of the Soviet Union, not only the after World War period. But on the other side, there was also a sort of how can I define it? A sort of superiority in considering communism as a failed, foolish utopia. And it was also ridiculed, actually, to some extent. And this was actually an attitude developed particularly in Western Europe, in the US, by the winner of the Cold War. So one side, there is this focus on violence, tyranny, so this gloomy past represented by communism. On the other side, this idea of miserable experience which completely failed in pursuing its own goals. So communism became, to some extent, something strange, something very far, although it had actually recently ended, and it became something actually outside history or in history, but not within specific processes, like a sort of nightmare, which finally ended. And I think that so there is this perception then actually generated different ways to represent the pre-1989 past. One side saw this idea of a tragic vision, on the other an ironic, so representation of communism from a point of view which perceive themselves as superior to this experience, because you have also to keep in mind that this is the 90s, where globally the age of the neoliberal euphoria, and this also influenced the way through which then the unification of Europe happened. But there is a first also attitude towards that past with a sort of nostalgic contemplation, and therefore I said I would be very curious also to hear some voices of people nostalgic of the communist past. There were then in the public debate in the 90s, particularly, also and connected with first steps of also a European Union enlargement towards East. This curious identification of or not identification, but strict relationship of fascism and communism as both sort of twin of the horrors of the 20th century Europe, and in a sense, the Gulag became in this narrative a sort of counter Auschwitz in order to construct an understanding of the history of communism. A bestseller of the end of the 20th century, the Black Book of Communism. Although in this book there are very important, actually, chapters, very serious chapters, but the public meaning of this book is more interesting in our discussion today. This was actually then the premise of very ambiguous reconsideration of historical figures, for instance. Let me just mention Marshal Antonescu or Admiral Horthy. So they became heroic resistors to the advance of Bolshevism, actually, and they lost their past of responsible for the deportation of Jewish citizens in their countries during the war. Well, I think that one last remark before I ask a couple of questions has to do with a sort of memorial attitude towards the past, which is actually a characteristic of our time. So this actually this prevalence of memory on history, actually. In referring to the past today, and particularly, especially actually considering the recent Korean past, the notion and the concept and the word memory is more often used than that of history. And this is this can be a tricky way to look at the past. Memory is a difficult actually word to understand, at least for me, because it actually combines a representation of historical events and at the same time a moral issue, at the same time a political agenda about what to do with the remembering and the legacy of some historical events in the present. And therefore, memory is a very important issue, and memory has to be discussed, has to be debated in public discussion in the schools and everything. But trying always to understand the specificity of this way to look at the past, which is different from history, although it has a relationship with history. So the importance of memory can be in the post-traumatic historical context, be to pay a tribute to the victims. This was very important in South Africa. This was important in Australia, for instance. The whole discussion in Australia on Aborigines and the origin of the state of Australia. This was important in Latin America and so on. It also helped to warn people, as Pierre said, to warn people, because to prevent the repetition of horrors or failure and so on. And it can also be important in order to foster specific ethnic, religious, national identities which were oppressed in course of history, and through memory they can be restored somehow. Although, of course, memory is always a dialectical process. We always nowadays speak of conflicting memories, because memory, being a part of the political debate, it is of course part of our democratic dialectic in our time. I try to go back to the presentation of Jana. I really appreciated your way to how to grasp different stances, different position nowadays on the memory of the Velvet Revolution, and so in order also to understand the afterlife of the Velvet Revolution in the history of these people who were protagonists and then in these 30 years developed their different lives and so on. These were students actually, so the end of communism, the opening. So also in the movie you show that this need to explore and to have access to circulate abroad and so on, new experiences and so on. And this was a world full of opportunity, the world outside communism. But since, if I right to remember, you said at the beginning that there are also other oral history projects you or other scholars in Prague developed on other social category, also working class, if I right remember you mentioned. I would be very curious actually to know if you can see a distance or differences between the memories of these people, because I think that for other, at least, Eastern European countries, this different actually was there. And a similar question for Teresa, because if I got it, the list of your interviewed, they are all of the former DDR. So I would be curious also to have the voice of someone from the west part of the Berlin Wall. It could be also interesting. I don't know if you also interview people from the west, but it would be, I think, interesting. And well, I would stop here because I really don't want to speak too much, because I would really appreciate if you could say some more words on your project. Thank you for being attentive.
Thank you very much. It was, I think, exciting speech, a lot of new ideas, and I think we can continue with these ideas also during interpretation of interviews. I think that my colleagues from the project will agree with me. I think, is Teresa prepared for some answer?
Yes, perhaps. Thank you very much, Paolo, for the very smart comment and in-depth commentary. Perhaps just something about nostalgics. Well, I don't know whether Hans Motov could be included in this category, probably to a certain extent. I think that there is also one further element in the context, which is the complex, since Germany and the two Germanys were the platform of the Cold War, no? So the complexity of the issue of memory related to 1989 and to the GDR past, and there is still held from the German state this Stiftung, this Foundation for Aufarbeitung, for reworking of the past, which is specifically dedicated to the GDR, and I think this plays a role also in the complexity of the whole thing, and this is also why I think that Hans Motov's experience is difficult to read, also in the light of the path that memory has taken according to these guidelines, so to say. reworking of the past. There is an interesting concept, I think, which is the one of multidirectional memory that Michael Rothberg has developed in relation to the Holocaust, to explain how the memory of Holocaust has been read differently in different nations, different countries, and so on. And I think it could perhaps be interesting to apply it also to 1989 and to the two Germanys as well, and to the experience of former communists too, as Hans Maudrup was. Obviously, his position is very controversial, and in today's Germany, it's a country in which perhaps these controversies have been at the center of the attention in the highest degree. He has been very attentive in re-narrating and reconsidering his past. He has been highly criticized for his repression of the Dresden uprising. I think he has a straight, direct position at the moment in his memoir, and this is what he has been repeating for the last 20 years, 30 years indeed. He's saying that he's rereading everything against the backdrop of the democratic socialism. So he's repeating this line, and he's trying to have a political coherence, so to say, with his past. Although he denies the dictatorial aspects of the GDR. No? So he's been trying in the past few years to represent himself, to describe himself as a reformist, as one of those who was not really in line with the most dictatorial personalities of the GDR, so closer to Gorbachev. It's not casual that his book is dedicated to Gorbachev and Perestroika, because he identifies himself as part of that discourse of detente and of glasnost and of Perestroika. So in this sense, I don't know, perhaps it's the closer to what you described as nostalgic, but I wouldn't define him as a nostalgic in 100%. And as far as the voices of someone of the West are concerned, that can, of course, be taken into consideration. That would be very interesting. It was not done from the beginning because we decided to concentrate on the experience of the peaceful revolution and on 1989 from the other side. But perhaps it could be a great enrichment to have at least one interview as far as we can from the other side. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would like, because Jana had to leave us, instead of her, if I may, only very shortly, there were also the topic of nostalgia and other groups of people, not only students, who were protagonists of the revolution. I think I totally agree, because I also, in a small part, participate in the project Jana presented, and I'm a member of the Center of Oral History, and we have in our collection several hundreds of interviews with people from various groups of people, from the highest communist protagonists to the so-called ordinary people, workers, but also technicians and so on. A lot of various interviews. And now, when we work with these interviews and when we interpret them, there is the nostalgia, in a sense, there is a present. Sometimes it's connected not with the regime, but more with the youth, with the time when people were not stressed and their life was full of opportunities and chances, and they were in the beginning of their life. What is important for us? So within the project that Jana was presented here, we did not make a comparison because of capacity, because of topic, and so on. But now we are at this point that Professor Capuzzo mentioned that we want to compare it, and this project with students was the first one when we tried to use some repeating of the interviews and to use the longitudinal perspective. And now we are at the standpoint preparing the projects. When we return to people we made interviews 10 or 20 years ago after the Velvet Revolutions to reflect not only the communist past but also their development. And here we feel very good chance for knowing more about the communist regime, but also about the post-communist development on this. So we are at the beginning. Are there any comments or answers to Professor Capuzzo, to the final remarks? Is there anybody who wants to say? So that's a moment that I would like to ask Gramsci Foundation for the final word for this webinar, if I may.
Hi, sorry, we are still dealing with the pandemic, if you see. So thank you all for your interesting remarks on the development of this project. And I think that from today on, we have a lot of new suggestions to work on coming from all the participants. So we have to reflect and to do something more to improve and to realize new reflections on what we have done until now. So I want to thank you all for coming, for listening, and even in this difficult situation, I know that it's not simple to follow such an interesting but also complex dialogue on a webcam. And but again, the issues were very, very interesting, and so we are very convinced that the project is going on in a good way, and that we can do even better from now on. Thank you very much, Lenka, for being such a kind and appropriate leader of this webinar. We were very happy to be your host in Prague, even at distance. And let's stay tuned and continue to follow us on the website of the project for the next event to come. Thank you all and goodbye. See you soon.
See you soon. Thank you. I wouldn't say better goodbye. And if everything is okay and will run smoothly on Tuesday, because Monday is a public holiday here, on Tuesday, the video will be prepared and we will share it for your web, for our Facebook, and so on.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody, and see you soon.
See you.